So now we're ready to go and start adding in some visual content within our web project. So every website needs a navigation bar. So this is what we're going to set up first within our Bootstrap framework. So with Bootstrap 4, there has been some changes to the navigation framework. So I'm going to highlight those as we go through the building of this. So essentially, we're setting up a class, calling it Navbar. So this is what's from before as well. And we've got some options as to our Navbar colors now. So I'm going to use Navbar Dark. And so there's Navbar Dark, Navbar Light. And the difference is that we need to specify what color code we want, what color of text we want to use. That's what this is doing, the Navbar Dark and Navbar Light. So if I do something like background primary, which is also new with Bootstrap 4, you're going to see that now whenever I refresh it, which we don't have any text in there, but we can see that we get the background color of blue. So new with Bootstrap 4 is the ability to set background colors, and then we also have this Navbar Light or Navbar Dark, which gives us the ability to update the text accordingly. So let's go ahead and add in some additional content in here. So I want to set up a div, and I'm going to give it a class. So this is going to be part of the content that collapses. So I'm going to give it a class of collapse. So this, again, this is a Bootstrap class. And another one of the changes within Bootstrap is that now with Navbar, we need to specify, so we've got Navbar toggleable, and we need to specify on what size screen it's toggleable. So that's the big change when it comes to Bootstrap 4, is we've got a whole lot more control with the different sizing of the screens, and the different classes all have these specifications on the screen size. And we didn't have that with Bootstrap 3, so now we've gotten more control on the sizes. So that's why I'm adding that in there. And now we've got the ability to actually to toggle some of this content. So I'm also going to add in a logo. So this is just going to be a span. And maybe this can keep a placeholder for some of our logo information for this website. Another thing that I want to do is I want to identify this particular div, because we're going to need to identify it with the toggle button. So let's give it a name. So this is going to be the name for our toggleable content, our Navbar toggleable content. So nav and I'm just going to call it nav tog, so that we know that this is where the contents of our content that's going to get toggled is going to be. So just going back to the different colors now. So notice that when we say dark, we get dark text, and whenever we switch this to light, we're going to get accordingly light text. So this is all depending on what. So let's go ahead and add in some text here, as well as give this one an ID so that we can identify it. So remember, again, this is going to be the element that's going to hold the collapsible content. So let's give it an ID. So I'm going to give it nav tog for the toggleable navigation items. Also within here, I want to create a span, and maybe this can be some logo or some type of information. So Bootstrap 4 now has another class as well. So this class is going to be called Navbar brand, and this is going to indicate any content that we want to do branding for. So let's go out and take a look at what we've got now. So now when I look at it, I've got this white text, blue background, and so going back again to the Navbar Dark, if I flip this to Navbar Light, we can see that now it's going to be assuming that the background is light, so it's going to give you dark colored text. And the opposite was Navbar Dark. so that way the text is a light color. So background primary is the default blue, and now with Bootstrap we can use all the different background colors that we want as well. So we've also got warning and so on. So these are the typical Bootstrap colors that are available to us, and we can really utilize these within background colors now with Bootstrap 4. So let's continue to build out our navigation bar. So now we've got a logo there, and we also need to list out some of the links that we're going to be using within our navigation bar. So I'm going to create some spacing for that, create an unordered list. So this unordered list is actually going to be our Navbar. So we've got to give it a class. So these are all default Bootstrap classes, and you need to include all of these classes in order to build out a navigation bar. So no, there's quite a lot of different classes that we're utilizing right now, but I really did want to jump in and show you what can be done with Bootstrap. So bring in the power of Bootstrap. So I am going to review these classes as well. So this class nav is different than Navbar because this is just for a regular navigation class, allowing you to style your content as regular navigation items. So just to give you a sample of that, so I'm going to do list items. So we know that within unordered lists we want to have a series of list items, and Bootstrap 4 again has a new class for that so that we can identify, or better, so that it can better identify what we see as the list items within Bootstrap. And so we've also typically within a menu, you're going to have a hyperlink going out to whatever part of the page, whatever link page you want to link to. And we also need to include a class for this as well. So nav link is going to be the class that I'm including, and we'll just shut that over and we'll just say link 1. So now let's go take a look at this within our browser, and I'll show you what this looks like. So there we go. So we've got our first link sitting there, and because it's just a nav, there's a differentiation between a nav bar and a nav. So I'll show you actually what the difference is here, and I'll show you what it's going to look like without the specific classes in Bootstrap. So let's create several other list items. I'm going to just bring them back in line over here, and give this one a link to 2 and a link to 3. So notice that we keep them all as nav items. We don't have any increment on the different list items. So now when I refresh it, we see we've got link 1, link 2, link 3, but it really doesn't look good because it's not aligning it properly. So even though it knows that this is a nav list, it doesn't necessarily know that it's a nav bar unless we specify nav bar, and this is a nav bar nav. So that's the class there. So when we change that, then right away it takes the characteristics of a navigation bar. And with Bootstrap, we can also move things around. So typically with CSS, we'd have to float it over to the right-hand side, but Bootstrap gives us a class for that. And again, we do have the option now within Bootstrap 4 to specify screen sizes. So we can specify that we want it to float over to the right-hand side on small screens. So that's what this class does. We also have the option to do left and so on, or we can also adjust when we want this breaking point to happen. So we could do it on large screens if we wanted to. So I'll show you what the difference here is going to be. So now when I refresh it, we see that we're pulled over to the right hand side on the large screens, but whenever we hit that breaking point, notice how these items here are now going to shift over to the left hand side. And that's because we've set our breaking point to LG. So typically for something like this, we probably wouldn't want it to move over unless maybe it's a small screen or something like that we're trying to save that space. So again, it's all a matter of preference and design, but Bootstrap gives you all of the capabilities here in order to implement it. And another thing you might have just noticed there, that whenever I shrink it down, it disappears there, the content disappears there, and that's because we've set it to this navbar toggleable excess. And basically what that means is that whenever we hit that small size, that we're going to set it up to be toggled. And in the next lesson, I'm going to show you to add that toggle button, because now that we're hiding it, we actually do need to make it toggle. We need to have a button to open that navigation menu back up. So that's coming up in the next lesson.